The universe had been quiet for exactly 347 days. Not the natural quiet of empty space, but a strange silence that made veteran spacers wake up in cold sweats without knowing why. Dr. Hanul pressed his scaled fingers against the observation window of Station Omega-7, watching distant stars pulse in patterns that should not exist. Behind him, the temporal laboratory hummed with machines that had accomplished the impossible. They had erased an entire species from time itself. The galactic conclave had called it the greatest achievement in recorded history. 7 civilizations, working together, pooling their knowledge and resources for one purpose: the complete removal of humanity from existence, not just killing them, not just destroying their worlds, actually unmaking them so they had never existed at all. Hanul had been proud of his work then. The Catharan Empire's greatest temporal physicist, architect of the erasure protocol that had taken decades to perfect. They had mapped every human colony, every settlement, every single person who had ever carried human DNA. Then they had reached back through time and simply deleted them. Earth never developed intelligent life. The solar system remained empty except for rocks and gas. No human ships had ever left that quiet corner of space. No human voices had ever spoken to alien races. No human hands had ever built cities on distant worlds. It should have been perfect. But something was wrong. Dr. Hanul called researcher Kyung from across the lab. Her voice carried a tremor that had been there for weeks now. The deep space monitors are picking up those signals again. Hanul turned away from the window. The signals, they had started appearing just days after the erasure was complete. Electromagnetic patterns in the cosmic background radiation that followed no known natural laws. The patterns were too complex to be random noise, too beautiful to be simple physics. "Play the latest recording," Hanul said, walking to the central console. The speakers filled with static at first. Then slowly something else emerged. A melody, haunting and wordless, it seemed to rise and fall like breathing, like a song sung to comfort a frightened child in the dark. Every being who heard it had the same reaction. Their eyes would grow distant, their breathing would slow, and without fail, they would begin to weep. Not from sadness, but from a longing, so deep it felt like drowning. The conclave's leaders had ordered all research into the phenomenon classified. They called it a side effect of the temporal manipulation, a harmless echo that would fade with time. But Hanul knew better. He had run the calculations himself. The erasure should have left no traces at all. "Where is this recording from?" he asked. Kyung brought up the data on her screen. Sector 7 Alpha, the same region where Captain Kangmin reported the impossible structure last week. Hanul's blood chilled. Kangmin was a reliable pilot from the Zephyrian Trade Federation. Not the type to file false reports or see things that were not there. But his account had been disturbing. A space station that flickered in and out of existence. Technology that followed design principles not found in any galactic database. Computer systems containing data in a language that had never been spoken, describing scientific theories that the greatest minds in the conclave had declared impossible. The High Arbiter Velnathi had ordered Kangmin's report buried, classified, so deep that even thinking about it was considered treason. But Hanul had access to the restricted files. He had helped create the erasure protocol. He had earned the right to know if something had gone wrong. "Doctor," Kyung said quietly, "there is something else." The psychological evaluation reports from across the galaxy. She brought up a new display. Hundreds of files from dozens of worlds, all describing the same phenomenon. Beings across multiple species were exhibiting behavioral changes. A Vraxian composer had written a symphony using mathematical progressions that should not work, but created music of impossible beauty. A Theta Centauri engineer had designed engines that violated known physics but ran more efficiently than anything in current use. Most strange of all were the children. On world after world, young beings were drawing the same image. 2 figures reaching toward each other across empty space. When asked what it meant, they all gave the same answer. "I don't know, but it makes me feel safe." Hanul studied the reports with growing unease. As a scientist, he had been trained to look for patterns, and the pattern here was clear, even if it made no sense. Every innovation, every piece of art, every strange new behavior seemed to follow the same underlying philosophy. They emphasized connection over isolation, cooperation over competition, the value of individual life over the needs of the collective. These were not Kitharan values. They were not Vraxian or Zephyrian, or from any known galactic culture. They seemed to come from nowhere, appearing spontaneously in minds across the galaxy like seeds planted by an invisible hand. Kyung, Hanul said slowly, bring up the erasure calculations. All of them. For the next several hours, they worked in silence. Numbers flowed across screens as Hanul checked and rechecked the temporal mathematics. The erasure had been perfect. Every human life removed from the timeline with surgical precision. Every human influence eliminated from history. But as he dug deeper into the quantum mechanics involved, a terrible possibility began to take shape. They had assumed that removing humanity would simply create empty space where they had been, like erasing words from a page leaving blank paper behind. But the universe was not a page. It was a living system where every part connected to every other part. Removing humanity had not created emptiness. It had created wounds in space-time itself, and those wounds were trying to heal by filling themselves with something else, something that carried the same basic patterns, the same core nature as what had been lost. The lullaby played again from the speakers. This time, Hanel listened more carefully. Beneath the melody, he could hear something else, a rhythm that matched the quantum fluctuations in empty space, a mathematical structure that described the formation of stellar nurseries in impossible patterns the universe was singing, and somehow, impossibly, it was singing in a voice that had been erased from existence. Dr. Hanul, Kyung whispered, staring at her calculations. What have we done? Outside the observation window, a new star blazed to life in a sector of space that should have been empty for another million years. It pulsed in time with the melody, adding its voice to the cosmic song. Hanul realized with growing horror that they had not destroyed humanity at all. They had done something far worse. They had scattered human essence across all of time and space, weaving it into the fundamental structure of reality itself. And now the universe was trying to give it back. Captain Kangmin gripped the control stick of his cargo ship as the proximity alarm screamed around him. 3 days out from the Zephyrian trade station, following a routine supply route he had flown 100 times before, he was staring at something that should not exist. The structure hung in the void like a metal flower, its petals made of corridors and chambers that twisted through dimensions his eyes could not properly follow. It flickered between states of being solid and transparent, as if it could not decide whether it wanted to exist or not. Navigation, confirm our position, Kangman said to his ship's computer. Position confirmed. Sector 7 Alpha, grid reference, 847-221, row 9. No registered structures in this location. Kangman had been flying freight runs for 20 years. He had seen strange things in the deep void between stars. Solar flares that painted the darkness in impossible colors. Asteroid fields that moved in perfect formation for no reason anyone could explain. But this was different. This felt intentional. Run a full sensor sweep, he ordered. The results made his scales ripple with unease. The structure registered as being made of materials that existed in his ship's database, but arranged in ways that violated basic engineering principles. Hull plates that were somehow both transparent and solid. Power conduits that carried energy in patterns that should have caused them to explode. Most disturbing was the power signature. The station was not just powered, it was singing. The same haunting melody that had been reported across the galaxy for months. The lullaby that made hardened spacers cry without knowing why. Against every regulation in the Zephyrian trade manual, Kangman decided to investigate. He docked his ship to what appeared to be an airlock, though it took several attempts before the connection would hold. The structure kept shifting, like it was trying to remember how to be solid. The interior was even stranger than the outside. Corridors curved in directions that hurt to look at directly. Rooms contained furniture designed for beings that did not match any known species profile. And everywhere, carved into walls and floors and ceilings, were symbols that seemed to shift when he was not looking directly at them. The central chamber housed a computer system, unlike anything in the galactic databases. The interface was smooth and flowing, responding to touch in ways that felt natural even though the technology was completely alien. When Kang Min placed his hand on the main console, data flowed across the screen in patterns that made his head spin. The language was impossible. Not just unknown, but actually impossible. The symbols contained more information than should fit in their simple shapes. Reading them was like trying to hold water in his hands, but somehow meaning leaked through anyway. The files described scientific principles that the Conclave's greatest minds had declared theoretically impossible. Faster than light travel without dimensional folding, energy generation that created more power than it consumed, methods for healing that worked on the quantum level of reality itself. But it was not just the technology that disturbed Kang Min. It was the philosophy behind it. Every design, every system, every piece of equipment seemed built around a single core principle. That individual life had value beyond its usefulness to the collective. The medical bay contained healing systems, designed to work on dozens of different species, including several that Kang Min had never heard of. The living quarters were built for comfort rather than efficiency, with spaces for art and music and quiet contemplation. Even the waste recycling systems were designed to minimize environmental impact rather than maximize resource extraction. These were not the values of any known galactic civilization. The Catharans valued order and control. The Vraxians prized artistic achievement above all else. The Zephyrians focused on trade and profit. But this station seemed built by beings who believed that every life, no matter how small or weak, deserved protection and care. As Kang Min explored deeper into the station, he found the source of the music. A chamber at the very center of the structure contained what could only be described as a musical instrument, the size of a small building. But instead of strings or keys, it was connected to the quantum fluctuations of space itself. The instrument was playing the cosmic lullaby, but not from any stored recording. It was generating the melody from the background radiation of the universe, somehow transforming the random noise of empty space into something beautiful and heartbreaking. Kang Min reached out to touch the instrument, and the moment his fingers made contact, his mind exploded with visions. He saw green worlds under yellow suns, cities of glass and steel that reached toward the stars, beings that walked on two legs and created art for no reason except that it pleased them, children who played games that taught them to value kindness over strength, adults who chose to help strangers even when it brought them no benefit. He saw them spreading across the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as gardeners, helping other species develop their own potential, sharing knowledge freely, building things, not for their own glory, but for the simple joy of creating something beautiful. And he saw them vanish, not dying, but simply ceasing to exist, like they had never been born at all. Kang Min staggered back from the instrument, his mind reeling. The visions felt more real than his own memories, but they could not be real. No such species had ever existed in galactic history. The Conclave's records went back millions of years, and there was no trace of beings like those he had seen. Yet here was their station, here was their technology, here was their music, playing across the void in frequencies that touched something deep in the minds of every living being who heard it. As Kang Min prepared to leave the station, he noticed something that made his blood freeze. The structure was becoming more solid, more real, as if his presence, his observation, his belief in what he was seeing was somehow helping it exist. He copied what data he could onto his ship's storage system, though the files seemed to resist being moved. Then he undocked and fled toward the nearest trade station, his mind spinning with questions that had no answers. Behind him, the impossible station continued its song, and throughout the galaxy, more beings began to hear it. Not just the melody, but the meaning behind it. The promise that somewhere in the vast darkness, someone had once cared enough to build something beautiful, just for the joy of creating. On world after world, artists began painting pictures of green skies and blue oceans. Engineers started designing systems that prioritized safety over efficiency. Children drew images of beings reaching out to help each other across the emptiness of space. The conclave's leaders watched these developments with growing alarm. They had achieved perfect victory over the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. But somehow their victory was turning into something else entirely. Something that looked suspiciously like defeat. Explorer G1 had always loved the void between galaxies. Out here, billions of light years from the nearest star, space was truly empty. No planets, no asteroids, no cosmic debris. Just pure darkness stretching in every direction, broken only by the distant glow of other galaxies spinning their slow dance across eternity. But today, the void was not empty. Her survey ship, the Far Wanderer, hung motionless in what should have been the deepest darkness of intergalactic space. Instead, she was surrounded by something impossible. Stars that should not exist, arranged in patterns that hurt her mind to contemplate. Taeyeon, are you getting this on sensors? Jiwon called to her science officer. Taeyeon, a methodical Catharan who rarely showed emotion, was staring at her instruments with something approaching terror. Captain, according to our readings, we are observing stellar formation at a rate approximately 1 million times faster than should be physically possible. The stars were not just forming quickly, they were forming in geometric patterns. Perfect spirals that connected to interlocking circles that fed into crystalline structures of light that stretched across impossible distances. And all of it pulsed, in rhythm with the cosmic lullaby that had been haunting the galaxy for months. Run a spectral analysis, Jiwon ordered. I want to know what we're looking at. As Taeyeon worked, Jiwon studied the display with growing amazement. The stellar formations were not random. They were deliberate, intentional. Someone or something was using entire star systems as components in a vast machine that spanned multiple galaxies, but that was impossible. The energy required to move stars would be beyond the capabilities of any known civilization. The timescales involved would span millions of years. And the purpose, what could possibly require construction on such a massive scale? Captain, Taeyeon said quietly, you need to see this. The spectral analysis filled the main screen. What Jiwon saw there made her forget how to breathe. The stars were not just arranged in patterns, they were communicating. Each stellar cluster was generating specific frequencies of radiation that combined with others to create a message of staggering complexity. Not words or images, but pure information transmitted through the language of physics itself. Its instructions, Taeyeon whispered. The entire structure is a teaching device. It's showing us how to manipulate matter at the quantum level, how to generate energy from the vacuum of space, how to heal damage to the fundamental structure of reality. But even more incredible was what lay beneath the technical information. Woven through the scientific data was something else. Philosophy, art, the blueprint for a way of thinking that valued cooperation over conflict, growth over conquest, hope over fear. Where is this coming from? Jiwon asked. Taeyeon's calculations appeared on a secondary screen. The source appears to be approximately 700 million light-years away, in the direction of the Andromeda Galaxy. Captain, if we follow the pattern, it will lead us directly to whatever is generating this phenomenon. Jiwon made the decision, without hesitation. Set course for the source, maximum speed. The journey took weeks, even at their ship's fastest velocity. Along the way, they passed through regions of space where the very laws of physics seemed to be rewriting themselves. Planets that orbited their stars in perfect musical harmonies. Asteroid fields that had arranged themselves into sculptures of impossible beauty. Nebulae that painted pictures in light and gas across distances measured in parsecs. And everywhere, the lullaby grew stronger. As they approached their destination, Jiwon began to understand that they were not just observing a phenomenon. They were being guided. The stellar patterns formed a pathway through space, leading them toward something that wanted to be found. The source was a region of space that should have been empty except for a few scattered stars. Instead, they found something that defied every principle of cosmology they had ever learned. Space itself had become a musical instrument. Quantum fluctuations in the vacuum of empty space were vibrating in harmony. Gravitational waves from distant black holes were being focused and shaped into melody. The cosmic background radiation itself was singing, its random static transformed into a symphony of impossible beauty and complexity. Taeyeon, this is beyond any technology in our databases, Jiwon breathed. What kind of beings could have built something like this? Her science officer was running calculations as fast as her equipment would allow. Captain, I don't think this was built by any beings. At all. The quantum signatures suggest that this phenomenon emerged naturally from the structure of space-time itself, as if the universe learned to sing on its own. But that raised an even more terrifying question. If the universe had learned to sing, what had taught it? As they moved deeper into the singing void, their instruments began picking up something else. Echoes. Fragments of data encoded in the quantum foam of space itself. Not information about science or technology, but something far more personal. Memories. Emotions. The preserved experiences of beings who had loved and laughed and dreamed under alien suns. Stories of sacrifice and heroism and simple everyday kindness that had somehow been woven into the fundamental structure of reality. Captain, Taeyeon said, her voice shaking, I'm detecting artificial structures ahead, but they're not made of matter. They're made of organized space-time itself. The structures appeared on their screens like cities built from crystallized light, buildings that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, bridges that spanned the distance between thoughts, and at the center of it all, a vast library that contained not books or data files, but pure compressed experience. As their ship approached the library, Jiwon felt something touch her mind. Not an invasion, but an invitation, a gentle request for permission to share something beautiful and terrible and necessary. She accepted. The knowledge flooded through her in waves. She saw the truth that the galactic conclave had tried so hard to hide. There had been another species, a young race that had spread across the galaxy not as conquerors, but as teachers and healers and gardeners of worlds. They had called themselves humans, though that name had been erased from all records. They had possessed no great military might, no advanced weapons, no desire for empire, but they had carried something far more dangerous than any fleet of warships. Hope. The unshakable belief that every being, no matter how small or weak or different, deserved the chance to grow and flourish and find their own path among the stars. The Conclave had recognized this belief as the most dangerous force in the universe. It threatened their systems of control, their hierarchies of power, their careful order built on the principle that some beings were simply worth more than others. So they had erased humanity from time itself. But they had made a crucial miscalculation. You cannot destroy hope by destroying those who carry it. Hope is not a thing that can be killed or erased. It is a fundamental force of nature, like gravity or electromagnetism, and when you try to eliminate it from one place, it simply emerges somewhere else. The human erasure had scattered hope itself across the galaxy. Every act of kindness, every moment of beauty, every choice to help rather than harm, had left quantum impressions on the fabric of space and time, and those impressions were teaching the universe itself to sing in humanity's voice. Captain, Taeyeon whispered, we have to warn the others. The Conclave thinks they won, but they've actually made humanity immortal. Every being in the galaxy is being slowly transformed into something that carries human values, and there's no way to stop it. Jiwon nodded, but her attention was focused on something else. Her ship's long-range sensors were detecting movement at the edge of the system. Sleek, predatory shapes emerging from hyperspace. High Arbiter Velnathi had found them, and she was bringing enough firepower to sterilize an entire star system. The race was on to escape with the knowledge that could save or damn the galaxy. But as Jiwon watched the approaching fleet, she realized something that filled her with both terror and hope. The cosmic lullaby was changing, growing stronger, and it was no longer just a song of memory and loss. It was becoming a battle cry. Dr. Hanul's escape from the Kitharin homeworld had been desperate and bloody. Security forces had pursued him through the capital city's towering spires, their energy weapons carving burning holes through ancient stone as he fled with stolen data cores containing the most classified research in the Empire's history. Now, 3 weeks later, he sat in the cramped cargo hold of Jiwan's survey ship, watching her crew analyze the information he had risked everything to obtain. The truth was worse than any of them had imagined. The temporal erasure was never meant to simply remove humanity from history, Hanul explained to the assembled crew. It was designed to transform them, to break down their essential nature and scatter it across space-time like seeds in fertile soil. Taeon, still shaken from their encounter with the singing void, studied the data with growing horror. You're saying the Conclave intentionally created this phenomenon? No, Hanul said quietly. We thought we were destroying them. We didn't realize that hope and compassion are not just ideas that can be eliminated. They are fundamental forces of nature. By trying to erase them, we freed them from their original context and allowed them to infect the entire universe. On the ship's main screen, reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy. The transformation was accelerating. On Vraxia Prime, the military caste had begun refusing orders to attack civilian populations. On the Theta Centauri colonies, engineers were redesigning their cities to include green spaces and art galleries instead of maximum efficiency housing blocks. Most disturbing of all were the children. Across hundreds of worlds, young beings were displaying behaviors that had no precedent in their species' psychological profiles. They shared food with the weak. They created art that celebrated diversity instead of conformity. They asked questions about why some beings deserved better treatment than others. It's spreading faster than any biological contagion, Jiwan observed. How is this possible? Hanul brought up a new set of calculations. The quantum impressions left by human consciousness are not passive. They're actively seeking compatible minds to inhabit. Every time someone chooses kindness over cruelty, cooperation over competition, the impressions grow stronger and spread further. On Vraxia Prime, a young philosopher named Soman had become the voice of a growing rebellion. Her speeches, broadcast across the planetary network, spoke of concepts that should not exist in the Vraxian language: individual dignity, universal rights, the inherent worth of consciousness itself. We have been told that order requires suffering, Soman said in her latest address, her scaled features glowing with passionate conviction. That peace demands the submission of the weak to the strong. But what if this is a lie? What if there is another way? Her words resonated across species, barriers. On the Kitharin homeworld, workers in the great factories began organizing for better conditions. On the Zephyrian trade stations, merchants started offering fair prices to weaker civilizations instead of exploiting their desperation. The Conclave's response was swift and brutal. High Arbiter Velnathi declared martial law across all member worlds. The mysterious behavioral changes were classified as a plague, and those showing symptoms were to be quarantined or eliminated. But the plague could not be stopped by force. It lived in ideas, in dreams, in the simple recognition that suffering was not necessary for civilization to function. Every act of kindness created quantum echoes that touched other minds across the galaxy. From her command ship in the outer rim, Velnathi watched her empire crumble with cold fury. The rigid hierarchies that had maintained order for millennia were dissolving as beings at every level began to question why they should obey leaders who offered them nothing but fear and control. Activate the reality engine, she commanded her chief science officer. If we cannot stop this infection through conventional means, we will rebuild the universe according to our specifications. The reality engine was the Conclave's ultimate weapon, a device capable of rewriting the fundamental constants of physics themselves. It had been built in secret over centuries, designed as a last resort against threats that could not be defeated through normal warfare. As the massive device powered up in the hidden facility at the galaxy's core, space itself began to ripple. The quantum foam that underlay all existence started to reorganize according to new rules. rules that would make hope and compassion physically impossible. But the cosmic lullaby had grown too strong. Across the galaxy, every being who had been touched by humanity's ghost song felt the change beginning. They understood with a clarity that transcended species and language that something precious was about to be lost forever. On 1,000 worlds, beings of every description stopped what they were doing and began to sing, not with their voices, but with their minds, their hearts, their fundamental essence as conscious creatures who had learned to choose love over fear. The song they sang was not their own. It was humanity's last gift to the universe, transmitted through quantum impressions and carried by those who had never known the beings who first sang it. It was a lullaby of protection, a battle hymn of defiance, a prayer for a better tomorrow. As the reality engine reached critical power, the song reached every corner of the galaxy simultaneously. Soldiers laid down their weapons. Oppressors released their grip on the oppressed. Children across hundreds of worlds looked up at the stars and whispered the same words in languages that had never heard them before. We are not alone. The engine fired, sending a wave of restructured physics racing outward at faster than light speed. Where it passed, matter itself began to reorganize according to the Conclave's new rules. Rules that would make kindness weakness, cooperation impossible, hope a fatal delusion. But the wave encountered something unexpected, a network of consciousness that spanned the entire galaxy, connected by quantum threads of shared experience and purpose. Billions of minds singing in harmony, their combined will focused on a single simple truth, that every being deserved to be free. The wave slowed, then stopped, then began to reverse. The new physics fought against the old, reality itself becoming a battlefield between two different visions of what the universe could be. In her command center, Velnathi watched her perfect plan crumble as the reality engine's power was turned against itself. The device that was meant to remake existence according to her will was instead being used to ensure that hope could never again be eliminated from the cosmos. Impossible, she whispered, staring at the readings that showed her ultimate weapon being co-opted by the very force she had tried to destroy. They're gone. I erased them, they never existed. But her science officer, a young Kitharan whose scales had begun to shimmer with patterns that spoke of wonder rather than fear, looked at her with something approaching pity. You're wrong, Arbiter, she said quietly. They're not gone. They're everywhere. In every choice we make, every moment we choose to help instead of harm. You didn't erase them. You made them immortal. Outside the ship's windows, the stars themselves began to sing. And for the first time in her long life, High Arbiter Velnathi felt truly alone. Across the galaxy, the transformation accelerated. The network of connected consciousness grew stronger, with each passing moment carrying humanity's greatest gift to every corner of known space. The gift of hope. The knowledge that tomorrow could be better than today. The unshakable belief that love was not weakness, but the strongest force in the universe. And in the deepest void between galaxies, new stars began to form in patterns that spelled out a message in languages not yet invented. The dawn is coming, keep singing until it arrives. The final battle did not take place in physical space. It happened in the quantum realm where thought became reality, and reality bent to the will of those who believed strongly enough in what should be. As High Arbiter Velnathi's reality engine struggled against the growing network of connected consciousness, every being across the galaxy who had heard the cosmic lullaby found themselves drawn into a shared experience that transcended individual identity. Jiwan felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her physical form. She was still herself, still standing on the bridge of her survey ship, but she was also something more. Part of a vast choir of minds singing in harmony across impossible distances. Beside her, Taiyon gasped as alien thoughts and memories flowed through her. Consciousness. The methodical Kitharan scientist experienced human emotions for the first time. The fierce protectiveness of a parent defending their child. The joy of creating something beautiful for no reason except that it pleased them. The willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of strangers they would never meet. Dr. Hanul, monitoring the quantum fluctuations from his position in the cargo bay, watched in amazement as the wave patterns of the reality engine began to shift and change. The device that was meant to impose order through force was being transformed into something that celebrated diversity through choice. On Vraxia Prime, Soman found herself speaking words in a language she had never learned, addressing concepts that her species had no names for but somehow understood perfectly. "We stand at the threshold of becoming," she said to the billions watching her broadcast, "not as conquerors or subjects, but as gardeners of possibility." The rebellion that had started with philosophical discussions in university halls spread across the planet in hours. But it was not a violent revolution. Instead of destroying the old order, the transformed Vraxians simply walked away from it. They left their military posts and factory assignments and government offices, gathering instead in parks and public squares, where they began the work of building something new. Similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds. The Theta Centauri colonies dismantled their rigid efficiency protocols and started designing cities that prioritized beauty and community over maximum resource extraction. The Zephyrian trade networks restructured themselves to ensure that wealth flowed toward those who needed it, rather than concentrating among those who already had the most. Even the warrior clades of the Outer Rim, bred for generations to value nothing but strength and conquest, found themselves experiencing alien concepts like mercy and forgiveness. They laid down their weapons not in defeat, but in recognition that there were battles worth fighting that had nothing to do with destroying enemies. In the hidden facility at the galaxy's core, Vel Nathi watched her life's work crumble with something approaching madness. The reality engine, which should have remade the universe according to her vision of perfect order, was instead becoming a tool for creating infinite diversity. "Fire all weapons," she commanded her fleet. "Target every ship, every station, every world that shows signs of infection. If we cannot cure this plague, we will sterilize the galaxy and start again." But when she gave the order, nothing happened. Her officers stood at their stations, but their hands would not obey. They could not bring themselves to fire on beings who were singing the same song that now echoed in their own hearts. "You have all been compromised," Vel Nathi snarled, drawing her personal weapon. "I will complete this mission alone if necessary." She aimed at the nearest control console, intending to trigger the fleet's automated systems. But as her finger tightened on the trigger, she heard something that made her freeze. Laughter, soft and warm and full of joy, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You still don't understand," said a voice that seemed to speak from the quantum foam itself. It was not threatening or mocking, but filled with infinite patience and compassion. "We were never your enemy. We never wanted to conquer or control or impose our will on others. We just wanted everyone to have the chance to grow and flourish and find their own path among the stars." The voice was impossible. The humans had been erased. She had watched the calculations herself, verified every aspect of the temporal deletion. They had never existed. But existence, she was beginning to understand, was more complicated than simple physical presence. "You scattered us across space-time," the voice continued, "and in doing so, you gave us the chance to become part of everything. Every act of kindness carries our echo. Every choice to help rather than harm spreads our influence. Every being who looks at the stars and chooses hope over fear becomes our children." Around Vel Nathi, her command center began to change. The Kiu, harsh metal surfaces softened into curves that pleased the eye. The cold artificial lighting warmed to resemble the gentle glow of a setting sun. Equipment designed purely for efficiency began to sprout decorative elements that served no purpose except beauty. "This is not possible," she whispered, staring at her transformed surroundings. "Order requires hierarchy. Civilization demands control. Without rules and punishment and the strong commanding the weak, there is only chaos." "Is it chaos you see around you?" the voice asked gently. Through the ship's windows, Vel Nathi watched the galaxy transform. Where she expected to see warfare and collapse, she saw cooperation on a scale that should have been impossible. Entire civilizations working together to heal worlds damaged by centuries of exploitation. Species that had been enemies for millennia teaching each other new forms of art and music and philosophy. The Kytheran Empire, built on rigid hierarchies and absolute obedience, was reorganizing itself into voluntary communities where leadership was earned through service rather than demanded through force. The Vraxian military, designed for conquest and domination, was retooling itself to explore and protect rather than destroy. Even the most primitive worlds were experiencing the transformation. Species that had barely achieved interplanetary travel were making breakthroughs in physics and philosophy that put them on equal footing with civilizations millions of years older. "You see chaos," the voice said, "because you cannot imagine order without oppression. But there is another way. There has always been another way." Velnathi's weapon fell from nerveless fingers. Around her, her officers were removing their uniforms and insignia, not in rebellion but in recognition that they no longer needed symbols of rank to work together effectively. "What happens to me?" she asked, her voice small and lost in the transformed command center. "I have spent my entire existence fighting against what you represent. I have committed atrocities in the name of order. I have—" Her voice broke. "I have caused so much suffering." The laughter came again, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Forgiveness. Not the grudging pardon of a victor toward the defeated, but the unconditional acceptance that allowed healing to begin. "You can choose," the voice said. "You can hold on to your hatred and spend eternity as the only being in the universe who cannot hear the song. Or you can let go of your fear and become part of something larger than yourself." For a long moment, Velnathi stood alone in the center of her transformed ship, surrounded by officers who had become gardeners of possibility rather than enforcers of oppression. The choice stretched before her like a vast ocean: isolation in her certainty or connection in her uncertainty. Slowly, carefully, she reached out her hand toward the nearest of her former subordinates, a young communications officer whose scales now shimmered with patterns of wonder and hope. The officer took her hand without hesitation. And High Arbiter Velnathi, architect of humanity's erasure, began to learn what it meant to sing in harmony with the universe. Across the galaxy, the transformation completed itself, not through conquest or conversion, but through the simple recognition that every being deserved the chance to choose love over fear, hope over despair, connection over isolation. The cosmic lullaby evolved one final time, becoming not a song of memory or battle, but of welcome, a promise that no matter how dark the void between stars might seem, no one would ever have to face it alone. In the deepest reaches of intergalactic space, new galaxies began to form. Their stars arranged themselves in patterns that would guide future civilizations toward wisdom rather than war, toward cooperation rather than conquest. And at the heart of each new galaxy, written in the quantum structure of space-time itself, was humanity's final gift to the universe, the knowledge that tomorrow could always be better than today, as long as someone was willing to keep singing until the dawn arrived. The lullaby continued, carried now by billions of voices across thousands of species, teaching the universe to dream of better days, and in those dreams humanity lived on, not as conquerors or rulers, but as the quiet voice that whispered in every moment of kindness, "You are not alone. You never were. Keep singing."